Rain hammered relentlessly against the towering windows of the National Transportation Archive in Washington. It was nearly 9 o'clock at night. Most of the building had already emptied. The endless concrete hallways, illuminated by cold fluorescent lights, stretched into silence. The only sounds left were the constant hum of the ventilation system and the steady rhythm of rain striking the glass. Daniel Carter sat alone at his brushed stainless steel desk in Office 4B. In front of him rested a thick archive folder stamped with silver lettering. Case file #13, the Vanishing Village status. Closed. He slowly closed it. Only 2 days had passed since the investigation ended. Officially, the case was over. Unofficially, it wasn't. He still couldn't forget the empty streets of the mountain village in Japan, laundry swaying gently in the wind, smoke rising from warm chimneys, fresh footprints crossing muddy roads, and not a single living person. Sometimes he felt that if he closed his eyes for just a moment, he could still hear the wind whispering through those endless cedar forests. Daniel rubbed his temples. Enough, he muttered to himself. He switched off the brass desk lamp. The office instantly became colder beneath the harsh white ceiling lights. Then the telephone rang. The old black desk phone was almost never used anymore. Internal communication had been digital for years. Daniel picked up the receiver. Carter's silence. Several long seconds passed, then a calm female voice spoke. "Come to my office." He recognized it immediately. Alina Brooks, director of the National Transportation Archive. Now, immediately, the line went dead. The director's office was on the 7th floor. The elevator climbed slowly. Daniel watched his reflection in the brushed steel doors. During the past week, he looked like a man who had aged several years. The elevator opened. The 7th floor was almost completely empty. Only executive offices occupied this level. Thick carpets absorbed every footstep. Beyond the enormous windows, the lights of Washington shimmered beneath the rain. The secretaries had gone home hours ago. The hallway stood completely silent. Only the director's office door remained slightly open. "Come in, Daniel." She didn't even look up. Alina Brooks stood beside the enormous window overlooking the city. She was in her early 60s. Her silver hair was neatly tied back. Her dark navy suit looked as immaculate as it had that morning. She belonged to the rare kind of people who never raised their voice. That was exactly why everyone listened. A single archive folder rested on her desk. Brand new dark navy, not a single scratch. Daniel immediately noticed it looked different from every other case file in the archive. The silver government seal was larger. Its corners were reinforced with polished steel. Across the front was embossed, National Transportation Archive below that. Case file #14 and beneath it. The Red Room Protocol. Daniel stared at it. "I thought," he finally said, "after Japan I'd have at least a few weeks." "I thought so too." She slowly sat behind the desk. "But this file appeared in the archive this morning." Daniel frowned. "Appeared?" "Yes." She gently pushed the folder toward him. "No one created it. Is this some kind of joke?" "No." He opened the folder. Inside lay a single sheet of paper. Centered on the page, in plain typewritten letters, were the words, "Red Room Protocol." Beneath them, "Do not open the red door." Nothing else. No explanation, no date, no signature, only those 6 words. Daniel turned the page blank. The next page, blank. Every remaining page, blank. Hundreds of empty sheets. "That's it, so we believed." Alina opened one of her desk drawers. She removed an old black and white photograph. It showed the archive's main entrance hall, nearly 60 years earlier. Employees walked across polished marble floors. Steel filing cabinets lined the walls. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. "Look closer." Daniel studied the photograph. Several seconds passed. Then he froze on the left side, where there was now nothing but a solid concrete wall. The photograph showed a door, bright red. The only colored object in the entire black and white image. He slowly looked up. "That's impossible. We've authenticated the photograph 3 separate times. Then where is the door now?" "That's exactly what we're trying to find out." She placed another photograph on the desk, then another, then another. Every photograph showed the archive from a different decade. The building had changed over the years. Walls had been renovated, hallways expanded, departments relocated, yet in every single photograph, somewhere, the same red door appeared, always in a different place. As though it moved on its own, Daniel felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Has anyone else investigated this?" Alina remained silent. Finally she answered. "The people who started this investigation." She paused. "Don't work here anymore. They were transferred." "No, what happened to them?" She stared through the rain-covered glass for a long time before speaking. "The problem, Daniel," her voice became quieter, "is that we can no longer find a single document proving they ever worked here at all." She unlocked a small steel safe from inside. She removed a thin crimson envelope. No address, no postage, no return label, only one name, Daniel Carter. She placed it beside the folder. "Don't open it." Daniel looked at her. "Why not?" "Because once you do, for the first time that evening." Alina Brooks looked genuinely afraid. There will be no way back, and Daniel stared silently at the envelope. Thunder rolled across the city at that exact moment. Somewhere deep inside the National Transportation Archive, heavy steel doors slowly closed. The sound echoed through the silent building, although the seventh floor was completely empty. Daniel could have sworn he heard someone whisper only two words. Red Room. Daniel didn't open the envelope, not that night. He slipped both the envelope and case file #14 into his leather briefcase before leaving Alina Brooks' office. Neither of them spoke another word. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt strangely longer than usual. The polished steel walls reflected only a single passenger, yet more than once Daniel had the unmistakable feeling someone was standing just behind him. Each time he turned, the elevator was empty. Outside, Washington was soaked in rain. The massive brutalist concrete facade of the National Transportation Archive towered over the deserted parking lot. Its reflective windows mirrored nothing but storm clouds and distant city lights. Daniel unlocked his car. Before climbing inside, he glanced back at the building for a fraction of a second. He thought he saw a faint red glow behind one of the upper windows. It disappeared before he could focus on it. He drove home without turning on the radio. His apartment overlooked the Potomac River. Usually, the familiar skyline helped him separate work from home. Tonight, it didn't. He left the archive folder on the kitchen counter. The crimson envelope remained unopened beside it. He poured himself coffee. He didn't drink it. Instead, he found himself staring at the envelope. It seemed wrong, not frightening. Wrong as though it belonged somewhere else, almost absent-mindedly. Daniel reached toward it. His fingers stopped less than an inch away. A memory surfaced. Alina's voice, "Don't open it." He slowly pulled his hand back instead. He opened his laptop. If the archive no longer contained records of the previous investigators, perhaps copies existed elsewhere. Federal personnel databases, retirement records, payroll systems, insurance registrations, something. He typed one phrase. Red Room protocol, no results. Not unusual. He tried again. Red Room, nothing. He narrowed the search. National Transportation Archive internal investigations. Hundreds of files appeared, maintenance reports, construction permits, budget requests, nothing unusual. Then a document title appeared for less than a second. Project R. The page refreshed. Gone. Daniel frowned. He searched again. Nothing. He leaned back in his chair. The internet connection hadn't failed. The search history still showed the result, yet clicking back revealed nothing. Almost as though the page had been erased while he was looking at it. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the archive before sunrise. The lobby was almost empty. Only two security officers stood near the entrance scanners. Everything looked ordinary. Employees carrying coffee, elevators opening, telephones ringing. The building felt reassuringly normal, which somehow made the previous evening feel even more unreal. At precisely 8:00 a.m., Alina Brooks appeared in his office doorway. She wasn't carrying the case file. Only a thin notebook. "Walk with me." They entered one of the employee elevators. She pressed a button Daniel had never noticed before. "B2, I thought the basement only had storage." "It does." The elevator descended. When the doors opened, Daniel immediately realized he had never been here. The basement looked older than the rest of the archive. Much older. The polished floors upstairs had become bare concrete. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Rows of gray steel shelves stretched away into darkness. Thousands of archive boxes stood in perfect order. No windows, no clocks. No sound except ventilation. "This section was never modernized," Alina said quietly. "It was built with the original archive." Daniel looked around. "It feels," she nodded. "I know." He couldn't explain it. The room wasn't abandoned. Everything was perfectly maintained, yet it felt forgotten, as though no human being had stood there in years. They stopped beside shelf C19. Alina removed a key from her pocket. She unlocked a narrow steel cabinet. Inside rested a single archive box. Its label read, "Personnel Records." She carefully lifted the lid. The box was empty. Daniel looked confused. "You said the investigators disappeared." "They did, so where are their files?" She handed him a typed inventory sheet, 23 names. Every line had been crossed out, not with black ink, not red. The names themselves had faded until they were barely visible. As if the paper had forgotten them, Daniel tried reading the first one. Only fragments remained. J. Har. The second, nothing. The third, only the letters Ann. He looked at Alina. "Chemical damage, no. Sunlight." "The box has never been opened." Daniel frowned. "Then what erased them?" Alina didn't answer. Instead, she handed him another folder. Inside were old employee photographs, department meetings, holiday parties, award ceremonies, dozens of smiling faces. One photograph caught his attention. 8 archive employees standing together. A handwritten note beneath it read, "Red Room Investigation Team. 1984." Daniel counted. 1, 2, 3, 7 people. Yet there were 8 shadows. He counted again. Still 7 people, 8 shadows. One shadow belonged to no one. He stared longer. The empty space between 2 employees looked occupied, like someone had been removed from reality while their shadow remained. Daniel's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Has anyone else noticed this? Only everyone who later disappeared. Silence filled the room. Then Alina spoke again. There is something else. She removed a yellowed blueprint, the original architectural drawings of the archive, dated. She unfolded it across a steel table. Daniel studied the floor plan. Reception, main hall, archive wings, vault C. Everything matched the building except one room, a square chamber near the center of the structure, painted entirely in red pencil. No room number, no measurements, only 2 handwritten words. Room RED. Daniel looked up. I've walked this building for 6 years. I know I've never seen this room. You couldn't. Why? Alina met his eyes. Because according to every modern blueprint, she slowly placed a second, updated floor plan beside the first. It was never built. The room had vanished. Concrete walls occupied the space where it once existed. No corridor led there. No entrance remained, only solid architecture. Daniel compared both blueprints again. Every measurement aligned perfectly. Except for that impossible room. He looked back at Alina. If it doesn't exist. She finished the sentence for him. Then why does every original blueprint still remember it? At that exact moment, the fluorescent lights flickered once. Only once, long enough for Daniel to notice something impossible. On the polished concrete floor, a line of wet footprints stretched away into the darkness between the shelves. They hadn't been there a second earlier. The prints continued around a distant corner, one after another, perfectly fresh, as though someone had just walked past them. Neither Daniel nor Alina had heard a single footstep. Alina slowly closed the blueprint without taking her eyes off the footprints. She said quietly, "We're no longer following the investigation." She paused. "It's leading us." The wet footprints disappeared between endless rows of steel archive shelves. Daniel stood perfectly still, staring at them. They were unmistakably fresh. Tiny droplets of water still glistened beneath the cold fluorescent lights, yet there wasn't another person anywhere in sight. "You see them too?" he asked quietly. Alina Brooks didn't even look at him. "Yes, this isn't possible," she answered without hesitation. "We don't use the word impossible anymore." Then she started walking. Daniel reluctantly followed. The archive shelves stretched endlessly in every direction. Each shelf was filled with identical gray archive boxes. Every box carried a perfectly printed white label, year, case number, category. Everything arranged with absolute precision. The farther they walked, the stranger the place became. Daniel knew the layout of the basement. From the elevator to the rear wall should have been no more than 100 meters. They had already been walking for nearly 5 minutes. The shelves never ended. He turned around. The corridor behind them looked exactly like the one ahead. Infinite, identical, perfectly symmetrical. "We should have reached the end by now." Alina nodded without slowing down. "We should have." She said it as though she wasn't surprised at all. The footprints suddenly stopped, not gradually, not at a doorway, simply in the middle of the concrete floor. The final footprint remained perfectly visible. There was no next step. As if whoever had been walking had simply ceased to exist. Daniel crouched. He touched the damp concrete. The water was cold, real. He lifted his fingers toward the light. Tiny droplets still clung to his skin. "This isn't a hallucination." "No." "Then where did they go?" Alina remained silent. They had almost decided to turn back when Daniel heard something. A faint sound, so quiet it barely existed, like someone slowly turning the pages of an old book. The sound lasted only a second. Then it came again, closer. Daniel turned. The shelves stood perfectly still. "You heard that?" "Yes." "Where is it coming from?" Alina listened carefully. The soft rustling returned this time. To their right, then to their left. The sound seemed to circle them, moving slowly, patiently, as though someone were reading through thousands of files. Without opening a single box, they continued deeper into the archive. A few minutes later, Daniel noticed something strange. The shelf numbers, C31, C32, C33. Then C31 again. He stopped walking. "We've already been here." Alina studied the metal plate. "No, the number." She ran her hand across it. The paint was old, factory applied. It hadn't been replaced. They continued. 1 minute later, another shelf, C31. Again, Daniel felt a cold knot tighten inside his chest. "That's impossible." Alina didn't even look up. "Exactly why I stopped saying that." Eventually, they reached a large concrete intersection. 4 corridors met in the center. Suspended above them hung an old steel direction sign. 3 arrows remained. Left arrow, vault C. Right arrow, personnel. Up arrow, exit. Daniel looked down. The 4th arrow had been crudely cut away. Only rusted bolts remained where it had once been attached. He stared at it. There was another direction. Alina nodded. "Yes." "Where did it lead?" She was quiet for several seconds. "That's what people have been trying to answer for over 40 years. She removed a government-issued tablet. The archive's digital blueprint filled the screen. A blue dot marked their position. Daniel frowned. Something wasn't right, the blue dot never moved. He walked several steps, still nothing. The GPS insisted they were standing beside the elevator. He looked at Alina. The map's frozen. No, she refreshed the system. The blueprint updated instantly. The signal worked perfectly, but according to every sensor. Neither of them had taken a single step. We've walked almost a kilometer, not according to the building. Suddenly the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the archive, only the emergency lights remained. A dull crimson glow slowly illuminated the floor. The entire basement became bathed in red. Daniel froze. Someone was standing ahead, a figure, perfectly still, tall. Silent, the emergency lighting flattened every detail of its body. He couldn't see a face. Only the outline. Alina. She hadn't moved. Neither of them breathed. The figure remained motionless. 5 seconds, 10. Then the emergency lights flickered. Once, the figure vanished, as though it had never existed. The fluorescent lights returned. Daniel hurried toward the place where the figure had stood. Nothing, no footprints, no shadow, no person, only a small white archive card lying on the concrete floor. He picked it up. Printed across the front were the words, Michael Turner Archive Investigator, date of employment, April 14, 1984, date of departure. Blank. Daniel turned the card over. Only one sentence had been written in faded red ink. He opened the door. They returned immediately to the 4th floor. Daniel went straight to the personnel database. He entered the name. Michael Turner, no results. He searched again, nothing. Federal employment records, nothing. Tax records, nothing. Social Security, nothing. Every database insisted the same thing. No one named Michael Turner had ever existed. Daniel slowly removed the archive card from his pocket. Then he noticed something. The red handwriting had changed. There were now 2 lines. The first remained the same. He opened the door, but beneath it, a second sentence had appeared. One that definitely hadn't been there before. You will find IT next. Daniel slowly looked up. Beyond the glass wall of his office, someone was standing in the hallway, a dark silhouette, completely motionless. He blinked. The corridor was empty. The hallway outside Daniel's office was empty. He stepped outside immediately, nothing. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above the polished concrete floor. Every office door stood exactly where it always had. No footsteps, no voices. No sign that anyone had been standing there only seconds before. Daniel slowly looked down the long corridor. It stretched nearly 100 feet before turning sharply to the left, perfectly straight, perfectly ordinary. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had simply stepped out of sight. The moment he blinked, he returned to his office. The archive card still rested in his hand. Michael Turner, the name meant nothing. No records, no photographs, no government identification, nothing except a single white card that seemed to rewrite itself. Daniel scanned it into the archive database. The computer paused, loading, then a warning appeared, unknown document format. He frowned. That message didn't exist in the archive software. Every document had a recognized format. He tried again. The scanner froze. Its screen slowly faded to black. Then white letters appeared. Access denied. A second sentence appeared underneath. Protocol active. The scanner restarted by itself. When the normal interface returned, the archive card was gone. Daniel looked around. It was no longer on the desk. He checked beneath the scanner. Nothing. The floor. Nothing. Then he opened the scanner lid. The card had somehow returned inside, exactly where he had placed it, untouched. He carefully closed the lid without trying again. At 11:30 that morning, Alina Brooks called him into conference room 2. The room contained only one large steel table, no windows, no decorations. Waiting inside was a man Daniel had never seen before. He looked to be in his late 50s. Dark gray suit, military posture, no name badge, no introduction. The man simply placed a thick folder on the table. Across the cover were the words, Architectural Maintenance Reports 1961-1964. Daniel opened it. Blueprint after blueprint filled the folder. Construction schedules, engineering notes, concrete reinforcement diagrams, everything documenting the original construction of the archive, nothing unusual until the final page, a hand-drawn cross-section of the building. Daniel immediately noticed something impossible. The modern archive had 7 floors above ground. 2 basement levels. The original blueprint showed 8 floors. There was another level. The man nodded once. There was. What happened to it? The answer came from Alina. We don't know. Daniel looked back at the blueprint. The missing floor sat directly between the 6th and 7th levels. No number, no department, only a handwritten label, level R. He looked up. The elevators skip it, they always have, but structurally, he pointed at the blueprint. The building couldn't exist without this floor. No, Alina folded her hands, it couldn't. The unknown man finally spoke. His voice was calm, measured. We've measured the building 3 separate times. He slid another document across the table. Laser surveys, architectural scans. Satellite imaging, every measurement confirmed exactly the same thing. The exterior height of the archive was nearly 14 feet taller than the combined height of all its documented floors. Daniel stared silently. So there's an entire floor inside the building that officially doesn't exist. The man nodded. And yet the building has always been this height. Daniel looked toward Alina. You've known this for 27 years and no one investigated. She gave him a tired smile. We did. What happened? Silence filled the room. Finally the man answered. They all disappeared. No one spoke for several moments. Rain tapped softly against the concrete walls outside. Daniel closed the folder. What exactly is the Red Room protocol? Neither of them answered immediately. Instead, Alina unlocked another steel case. Inside rested a thin cassette tape, white label, black handwriting, only 4 words, do not play. Daniel looked at her. You played it once. What happened? She looked at the cassette for a long time. When the recording ended, 3 people no longer remembered my name. Daniel laughed quietly, not because it was funny, because it was impossible. You expect me to believe memory just... He stopped. A thought crossed his mind. He looked toward the unknown man. I'm sorry, he frowned. What was your name? The room became silent. The man slowly smiled, a sad smile. You asked me that 5 minutes ago. Daniel searched his memory. Nothing, not even a single syllable. His face, his voice, his suit, everything remained perfectly clear. Everything except his name. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. I can't remember. The man nodded. Neither can I. Alina slowly stood. It's beginning. Daniel looked at her. What is the protocol? She walked to the wall. Removed a framed photograph of the archive taken in 1961. Behind it, hidden inside the concrete, was a small steel elevator control panel. Daniel stared. He had worked in this building for 6 years. The panel had never been there, or perhaps he had simply never noticed it. Only 2 buttons remained, and beneath them, covered by a locked brass plate, one final button painted deep crimson. No label, no numbers, only red. Alina rested her hand on the brass cover without looking away from it. She whispered, for 64 years this button has never been pressed. Then she looked directly at Daniel. And tomorrow, we're going to find out why. The rain hadn't stopped. Dark storm clouds hung low over Washington, D.C., hiding every trace of the morning sun. Daniel Carter had barely slept. All night, the same 3 thoughts had circled endlessly through his mind. The crimson elevator button, level R, and the cassette labeled Do Not Play. He knew Alina Brooks was hiding something. Not because she didn't trust him, because she was afraid. At exactly 7 o'clock the following morning, Daniel unlocked his office. Something immediately caught his attention. A small black case rested neatly in the center of his desk. He was certain it hadn't been there the night before. The case carried no labels, no inventory number, no security seal, only the silver emblem of the National Transportation Archive. He slowly opened it. Inside rested an old Panasonic cassette recorder, early 1980s, perfect condition. Beside it lay a white cassette, handwritten across the label. Do not play. Daniel stared at it. The office door opened. You were going to play it anyway. It was Alina. She didn't look surprised. You left this here. No. Then who did? She slowly shook her head. That's exactly what worries me. A few minutes later they entered the archive's sound analysis laboratory. The room was designed for restoring damaged recordings recovered from transportation investigations. Thick reinforced concrete walls, acoustic panels, no windows. The heavy steel door sealed automatically behind them. At the center of the room stood a professional archival cassette deck. The white cassette rested beside it. Alina looked at it for a long time. If we do this, she hesitated, there won't be any way back. Daniel nodded. I understand. She looked directly into his eyes. No, her voice was almost a whisper. You don't. She inserted the cassette and pressed play. For several seconds, only the soft hiss of magnetic tape filled the room. Then, a man's voice emerged, calm, measured, like someone reading an official government document. National Transportation Archive. A pause. Internal protocol recording. Another pause. Classification level, crimson. Daniel listened carefully. The narrator continued. If you are listening to this recording, the protocol has already begun. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He glanced at Alina. She hadn't moved. It was as though she'd heard every word before. The voice remained perfectly calm. The Red Room does not exist as a physical location. Daniel frowned. It exists wherever someone remembers it. Silence filled the laboratory. Every investigation strengthens its existence. Every attempt to erase it allows it to move. Every witness becomes part of the archive. Daniel looked toward Alina. Some kind of psychological experiment. She didn't answer. The recording continued. Rule 1: never search for the Red Room. A brief pause. If you search for it, it begins searching for you. The laboratory suddenly felt colder. Daniel instinctively looked toward the ventilation system. Nothing had changed. The air itself simply seemed colder. The recording continued. Rule 2: if you discover a red door, do not touch the handle. Do not photograph it. Do not describe it. Do not remember where you saw it. Daniel gave a quiet, uneasy laugh. How are you supposed to forget something you've already seen? Alina answered softly. That's exactly what they tried. Who? Everyone who investigated this before us. The tape suddenly crackled, several seconds of static, then a different voice, younger, breathing hard, panicked. If anyone finds this recording, the man sounded exhausted, as though he had been running. Don't let Brooks. The tape shrieked with interference. The rest vanished beneath static. Daniel turned toward Alina. Her face had gone pale. You heard that. She didn't answer. The recording resumed. Now the unknown man was shouting. She doesn't know. She opened it. A violent crash, metal striking concrete. The cassette hissed. Then silence. 10 long seconds passed. Daniel thought the recording had ended then. Another voice spoke, deep, calm, almost perfectly emotionless. Daniel Carter. Daniel froze. His name echoed through the laboratory. The voice continued. You are listening too late. He stared at the cassette recorder. That's impossible. No one could have recorded his name. The cassette was over 40 years old. The voice continued. You believe this recording was made decades ago. A pause. It wasn't. The laboratory became unnaturally quiet. Every person hears it for the first time. Every person believes someone else recorded it. Every person is wrong. Daniel slowly stood. Turn it off. Alina didn't move. She stared at the cassette as though she were afraid to touch it. The voice continued. The director already knows. A pause. She has forgotten knowing. Daniel turned toward Alina. What does that mean? She slowly closed her eyes. She pressed trembling fingers against her temples. I remember. Tears filled her eyes. I've been there before. Daniel felt his heartbeat quicken, where she wasn't looking at him anymore. Her eyes were fixed somewhere far beyond the laboratory walls, behind the red door. Silence. Daniel could barely breathe. When? I don't know. You told me no one had ever opened it. She slowly shook her head. No. Her breathing became uneven. I said no one had ever pressed the button. She looked directly at him. Those aren't the same thing at that exact moment. Every monitor in the laboratory switched on simultaneously. No one touched the controls. Each screen displayed the same image. An old black and white photograph of the National Transportation Archive. The very photograph Daniel had already seen, but something had changed. The red door was open. Inside the dark doorway, a figure stood motionless, watching the camera. Watching them, no one moved. The laboratory monitors continued displaying the same photograph, the old black and white image of the National Transportation Archive. The bright crimson door stood open. The figure inside remained perfectly motionless. Daniel stepped closer. At first, it looked like nothing more than a silhouette, but as he leaned toward the screen, details slowly became visible. It wasn't standing inside the doorway. It was standing just beyond it, as though the room behind the door extended far deeper than the building itself. The figure wore a dark suit, exactly like every archive employee. Its face remained hidden in darkness. Only its eyes reflected faint light. They weren't glowing. They simply didn't seem human. Every monitor suddenly flickered. The photograph changed. Now the doorway was empty. The figure was gone. Daniel looked around the laboratory. Every screen displayed the same image. Every screen except one. The monitor closest to the door showed something different. A live security camera. The hallway outside the laboratory. Empty. Then, a man slowly walked past. Dark suit. Calm pace, head lowered. Daniel frowned. I know him. Alina looked at the screen. No, she whispered. You don't. The man disappeared around the corner. Daniel replayed the footage. The system immediately displayed an error. No recording found. Within minutes they were standing outside the laboratory. The hallway was empty. Daniel walked to the exact place where the man had appeared. Nothing. No footsteps, no surveillance camera, no sign that anyone had been there. He looked back toward the laboratory door. Alina, she was staring upward. At the ceiling. No. She whispered. Daniel followed her gaze. Above the laboratory entrance hung a small brass room number, B214. He blinked. A second earlier, he was certain it had read B213. He looked again. Now it said B214. He felt a knot form in his stomach. Did he stop? Alina answered before he finished. Yes. The building is changing. They returned to the director's office without speaking. Alina unlocked a second safe, much larger than the first. Inside rested dozens of sealed government boxes. Every box carried the same crimson stripe. She removed one, placed it on the desk. Daniel opened it. Inside lay hundreds of employee photographs. Every photograph showed ordinary archive workers. Every photograph had something in common somewhere in the background. A red door, sometimes almost hidden, sometimes only partially visible, sometimes reflected in polished steel, sometimes barely noticeable inside a distant hallway. Always there. Daniel slowly turned page after page. The decades changed, the employees changed. The architecture changed, the door never did. How many photographs are there? Alina answered quietly. 26,000. Daniel stared at her. You checked all of them? No. She slowly shook her head. They keep changing. She handed him another file. This one contained maintenance reports, electrical inspections, security upgrades, elevator repairs. Nothing unusual until the final page. A handwritten note dated October 12, 1979. Do not service elevator 3 once the red indicator appears. No signature, no department, no explanation, only the warning. Daniel looked up. Red indicator. Alina stood. Come with me. They entered elevator 3. It looked identical to every other elevator in the archive. Brushed stainless steel walls, soft ceiling lights, nothing unusual. Daniel counted the buttons, B2, B1. Exactly as always, Alina inserted a small brass key into an almost invisible lock beneath the control panel. A quiet click echoed inside the elevator then. A hidden compartment slowly opened beneath the buttons. Daniel stared. Inside was the crimson button. Exactly as he had seen it behind the photograph. No number, no letter, only a deep red circle beneath protective glass. Alina looked at it without speaking. I've carried this key for 27 years. You've never used it? She slowly shook her head. No. Why? Because everyone who ever pressed it. She hesitated, opened the door. Daniel looked at the button. It seemed strangely ordinary, just painted metal beneath glass, nothing supernatural, nothing impossible. Then he noticed his reflection. Only, it wasn't following his movements. Daniel remained perfectly still. The reflection smiled very slightly. His blood turned cold. He spun around. The elevator was empty. When he looked back, the reflection had become normal again. The elevator suddenly vibrated. Without anyone touching the controls, the doors slowly closed. Daniel reached toward the regular floor buttons. None responded. The elevator began moving, upward past the 7th floor. A soft electronic chime sounded. There was no 8th floor, yet the digital display changed. 7 then, instead of disappearing. A new character slowly illuminated. The elevator stopped. Silence filled the cabin. Neither of them moved. A soft mechanical sound echoed beyond the doors, as though another elevator had arrived at exactly the same floor. Then came footsteps, slow, measured, approaching. One after another, stopping directly outside. Daniel held his breath. Someone was standing on the other side of the doors. Then a calm voice spoke, not loudly, barely above a whisper, yet perfectly clear. Welcome back. Alina. Daniel slowly turned toward her. The color had completely drained from her face. Her eyes remained fixed on the closed elevator doors. Almost inaudibly, she whispered, "It remembers me." The elevator remained perfectly still. Only a single character glowed on the display. Someone was standing outside. Daniel could hear breathing, slow, calm, patient. Whoever waited beyond the doors wasn't in any hurry. Several long seconds passed. Then the voice spoke again. Alina. A pause. You're only 27 years late. Daniel felt Alina tense beside him. Who is that? He whispered. She didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the closed elevator doors. A soft mechanical chime echoed inside the cabin. The doors began to open, only a few inches at first. Daniel instinctively stepped forward. Alina grabbed his arm immediately. Don't look. What? Don't look inside right away. Why? Her answer was barely audible. Because then the room will see you before you see it. Before Daniel could respond, the door slid completely open. There was no hallway, no concrete walls, no hidden floor. Instead, an enormous dark expanse stretched before them, limitless. It looked less like a room and more like another world concealed inside the archive. Endless rows of towering steel shelves disappeared into darkness. The ceiling could not be seen. Thousands of tiny white lamps illuminated narrow aisles extending far beyond visible distance. The air was perfectly still. No ventilation, no echo, no smell. Only absolute silence. Daniel stepped out of the elevator. His shoes touched smooth black stone instead of concrete behind them. The elevator remained open, waiting. Neither of them spoke as they walked between the shelves. Every shelf contained identical dark navy archive folders, each embossed in silver letters, case file, and beneath it, a number. #1, #27, #304, #9012. The numbering followed no recognizable sequence. Daniel absent-mindedly brushed his fingertips across one of the folders. It felt warm, as though someone had been holding it only moments earlier. He couldn't finish. Alina answered quietly. Every unresolved case. Daniel frowned. The archives. She slowly shook her head. The worlds. Daniel suddenly stopped walking. Ahead of them stood a vast circular chamber. At its center rested an enormous wooden table. Dozens of chairs surrounded it. Most of them were occupied. Men, women, young, old. Every one of them sat perfectly still, looking straight ahead, not speaking, not blinking. Not moving. Daniel took another cautious step. Then he froze. He recognized one of the faces immediately. The photograph. Michael Turner, the missing archive investigator. He sat quietly at the table, looking into empty space, waiting. Daniel whispered, "That's impossible." Michael slowly turned his head. His eyes met Daniel's. Calmly, almost kindly, he answered, I thought so too. Daniel hurried toward him. You're alive. Michael smiled. It was a tired smile. Not exactly. We can get you out of here. Michael slowly shook his head. No, why? Michael looked toward the endless shelves surrounding them. Because I'm already part of the record. Daniel stared at him. I don't understand. The archive doesn't preserve documents. Michael's voice remained perfectly calm. It preserves the people who learn too much. Another voice echoed behind them. Daniel, he turned. A man in his 50s slowly approached. Dark government suit, silver identification badge. Across it were the words Archive Director. Daniel frowned. You're the director. The man smiled faintly. I was. What's your name? The man opened his mouth for a moment. Confusion crossed his face as though his own memory could no longer reach the answer. Finally he spoke. I don't remember anymore. Elinor lowered her eyes. That's why I never wanted to come back. The former director looked at her. Elinor, she remained silent. You left me here. Daniel looked between them. You know him? She nodded slowly. Yes, who is he? Her voice was almost inaudible. My predecessor. Silence settled over the chamber. Daniel searched his memory. Every official archive document listed Elinor Brooks as director before her. There had been someone else he knew there had, but the name, it was gone. Only seconds earlier he had been certain he remembered it. Now, nothing. The former director smiled sadly. You see, he slowly touched his badge. The letters began disappearing one by one. First his name, then his surname, then even the title, Archive Director, until only a blank piece of polished metal remained. A quiet clicking sound echoed throughout the chamber. Daniel looked around. Thousands of archive folders were opening by themselves. Pages slowly turned without wind. The rustling grew louder. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of pages turning together. It sounded as though the entire archive had begun reading itself. Then another voice spoke, not from a person, from everywhere. The shelves, the ceiling, the darkness. The stone beneath their feet. The voice was calm, emotionless, ancient. Case file number 14. A pause. Status. The air around them began to change. The white lights dimmed. The darkness between the shelves seemed to shift. The voice finished. Open. At that exact moment, every folder slammed shut. The impact thundered through the chamber like an explosion. Far beyond the endless shelves, something slowly opened. A doorway, not red, not this time, completely black, and from somewhere deep beyond it, something began walking toward them. No one spoke. The sound of thousands of archive folders slamming shut echoed through the endless chamber before slowly fading into silence. Then footsteps, slow, measured, steady. They came from somewhere beyond the black doorway, not hurried, not threatening, confident as though whatever was approaching had been expecting them for a very long time. Daniel instinctively stepped in front of Elinor. The footsteps continued, one, another, then they stopped. The darkness inside the black doorway remained completely still. Don't move. It was Michael Turner. His voice was calm, almost resigned. Daniel looked toward him. Michael hadn't taken his eyes off the doorway. It can't cross what it can only invite. Daniel frowned. What exactly is it? Michael slowly shook his head. We never found a name. The silence became unbearable. Then a man walked out of the darkness. He looked ordinary, middle-aged, dark government suit. White shirt, black tie, perfect posture. There was nothing frightening about him, nothing unnatural, except Daniel couldn't focus on his face. Every time he tried, his memory slipped away. It wasn't blurred, it wasn't hidden, it simply refused to stay in his mind. He looked away for a single second. When he looked back, he couldn't remember what the man had looked like. The stranger smiled politely. Good morning, Director Brooks. Elinor didn't answer. The man turned toward Daniel. You must be Daniel Carter. His voice was warm, friendly, exactly like someone greeting a new colleague on his first day. I've been waiting for you. Daniel remained silent. The man glanced toward the endless shelves. Most people are frightened when they arrive. His smile widened slightly. You seem curious. Who are you? Daniel asked. The man considered the question for several seconds. Then he answered, I've had many names. Another pause, but none of them remain. You work here. The stranger looked around the chamber. I am the oldest record this archive has. Daniel felt the air grow colder. Michael quietly whispered. Don't ask another question. Daniel ignored him. What is this place? The man looked genuinely pleased. Asking questions is why all of you eventually come here. He slowly walked toward one of the endless shelves. His fingers rested on a dark navy folder. This building, he spoke almost affectionately, was never built to store documents. He gently removed the folder. It was built to contain memory. He opened the file. Its pages were blank, completely empty. Then words slowly appeared, not typed, not handwritten. They simply emerged across the paper. Daniel's own voice filled the silence. What is this place? The exact sentence he had spoken only moments earlier. The stranger smiled. You see. He closed the folder. The archive writes itself. Daniel stepped backward. That's impossible. The stranger looked at him with quiet amusement. So was a village erased from every map. Daniel fell silent. The man continued. So were investigators whose names disappeared. Another pause. So were doors that moved. His smile faded. Reality adapts surprisingly well. Alina finally spoke. What do you want? The stranger looked at her. I want exactly what I wanted 27 years ago. You already have enough. He slowly shook his head. No, his eyes moved toward Daniel. I need a keeper. Michael suddenly stood. No, the stranger looked disappointed. You've said that before. Michael stepped between them. You promised. I never promise. You said no one else had to stay. The stranger's expression didn't change. I said I hoped they wouldn't. Daniel looked from one man to the other. What is he talking about? No one answered. The stranger sighed softly. Then he walked toward an enormous steel cabinet standing alone in the center of the chamber. Unlike every other shelf, this one contained only 14 folders, numbered in perfect order. Case #1, case #2, case #3. Until case #14, the final folder was still open. Its pages were filling themselves. Line after line, sentence after sentence, every conversation, every decision, every step Daniel and Alina had taken since opening the file, the story was writing itself in real time. Daniel slowly approached. He looked closer. His heartbeat stopped. The final page had already been written. He hadn't lived it yet. At the bottom were the words, Daniel Carter accepts custodianship of the archive. Beneath that, one final line, case file #14, closed. Daniel stepped back. I never agreed to this. The stranger calmly looked at him. You will without warning. Alina reached forward. She tore the final page from the folder. Every light inside the chamber instantly went out. Absolute darkness swallowed the archive. The stranger spoke for the first time without smiling. You've done this before. Alina's voice was steady. I remember enough. A deep metallic groan echoed through the endless shelves. Somewhere in the darkness, thousands of archive cabinets began opening simultaneously, and this time, they weren't opening by themselves. Something was opening them from the inside. The darkness was absolute. Daniel couldn't even see his own hands. The only sound that remained was the deep metallic rumble echoing somewhere among the endless shelves. It was getting closer, as though thousands of heavy cabinet doors were slowly opening one after another. Click, click, click. The endless chain of metallic sounds rolled through the chamber. Then silence. Don't move. Alina's voice came from somewhere beside him. Daniel still couldn't see her. What's happening? Listen. Another sound emerged from the darkness. Not metal, not footsteps. Breathing. There were dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, as though countless people were standing all around them, watching, waiting, without saying a word. Daniel instinctively held his breath. For the first time since entering the archive, he no longer believed they were alone. One by one, small lights began illuminating the darkness. Not electric lights, old desk lamps. Each one revealed only a single archive cabinet, then another, a 10th, a 100th. Within seconds, the endless archive slowly returned into view. Daniel looked around. His blood turned cold. Standing beside every open cabinet was a person, perfectly still. Silent, men, women, children, elderly people. Each stared straight ahead. None blinked. None breathed visibly. None moved. Michael spoke quietly. Don't look into their eyes. Daniel immediately lowered his gaze. Who are they? Unfinished cases. Daniel frowned. They're people. Michael remained silent for several seconds. They used to be. The stranger appeared once again, walking calmly between the shelves, as though nothing unusual had happened. You frightened my guests again. His voice sounded almost welcoming. Daniel didn't answer. He simply watched him. You want to know why the archive exists? Daniel remained silent. The stranger continued anyway, because human memory is imperfect. He slowly ran his hand along one of the shelves. People forget, they die. Documents disappear. History is rewritten. He turned toward Daniel. But truth should never disappear, so you take people. Daniel asked. No, the stranger smiled. They stay willingly. No one would willingly remain here forever. You believe that? The stranger slowly raised his hand. Michael stepped forward. Without hesitation, without resistance. As though performing a familiar routine, Daniel stared at him. Michael, the former investigator, gave him a tired smile at first. Everyone wants to leave. He looked across the endless chamber. Eventually they understand. What? If we leave, someone has to forget. The stranger stopped before an enormous world map covering an entire wall. Hundreds of tiny crimson lights glowed across its surface. Daniel stepped closer. Japan, case #13. The light slowly faded. Another light appeared. Washington, case #14. He swallowed. Are these every case? No, the stranger calmly shook his head. Only the ones currently open. Daniel studied the map. Red lights slowly appeared and disappeared across the world. Norway, Brazil, Canada, Iceland, Ukraine, Australia. Some faded away, others appeared. The archive was constantly watching. What happens? Daniel spoke almost in a whisper. If the archive disappears for the first time, the stranger stopped smiling. History begins to die. You're lying. Perhaps. The stranger calmly met Daniel's eyes. But you have no way to prove it. Alina stepped forward. He isn't staying. I know. The stranger nodded. Then let us leave. I can't. Why? His eyes slowly drifted toward the open folder labeled Case file #14 because the story is almost finished. Daniel suddenly reached into his jacket. He unfolded the final page Alina had torn from the folder. He looked down. The words were changing. His name no longer appeared at the bottom. Instead it now read, "Custodian not yet determined." Daniel looked up. "We changed it for the first time." Something resembling concern crossed the stranger's face. He said nothing. A deep tone suddenly echoed throughout the archive. Not an alarm, more like the ringing of an enormous bell somewhere deep beneath the building. Every silent figure standing beside the cabinets slowly turned toward the same direction. The air itself began to vibrate. Michael's face lost all color. "No," Daniel looked at him. "What is it?" Michael whispered only 3 words. "He's awake." Who? Michael slowly raised one trembling hand, pointing somewhere far beyond the black doorway. Deep inside the heart of the endless archive, an elevator had begun moving. An old elevator, very old. Its machinery groaned as though it hadn't operated for decades. The floor indicator slowly advanced. B2, B1, 1, 2. It was rising toward level R. But the elevator cabin was empty. No one stood inside, and yet someone had pressed the call button from within. The ancient elevator continued its ascent. Its worn mechanical gears groaned somewhere beyond the black doorway. The floor indicator climbed slowly. 3, 4, 5. Every number echoed through the endless archive. Daniel couldn't explain why, but each sound felt strangely familiar. As though he had heard this elevator before. Long ago, every silent figure standing beside the open cabinets slowly turned toward the same direction. Thousands of faces, perfectly synchronized, watching, waiting. Not one of them looked at Daniel anymore. They were all looking toward the approaching elevator. The stranger quietly spoke. "He's almost here," Daniel finally asked. "Who?" The stranger answered without hesitation, "The first keeper." Silence. Michael lowered his head. "Alina." He whispered, "We don't have much time." The elevator stopped. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a soft metallic bell rang once the doors opened. No one stepped out. Several long seconds passed. Then, footsteps, heavy, slow, unlike the calm footsteps Daniel had heard before. These sounded ancient. Each one echoed through the archive like distant thunder. A figure slowly emerged from the darkness. At first Daniel could see only the outline, very tall, broad shoulders, long black overcoat, old leather gloves. The man walked without hurry, without emotion. When he finally stepped into the light, Daniel immediately understood why everyone had been waiting. The man's face looked wrong, not distorted, not monstrous. Simply timeless. He looked simultaneously 40 and 80, young and impossibly old. His eyes carried something Daniel had never seen before. Not cruelty, not kindness, only endless memory. The stranger lowered his head respectfully. "So," he said quietly, "you've awakened." The newcomer looked around the chamber. His voice was deep, calm, older than anyone standing there. "I never sleep." He stopped. His eyes slowly settled on Daniel. "So?" A faint smile appeared. "The archive finally chose another." Daniel shook his head immediately. "It didn't choose me." The man answered softly, "It already has." Alina stepped between them. "No." The newcomer looked at her. "You said the same thing." "Because I won't let it happen." The first keeper smiled sadly. "You already tried." Daniel frowned. "What does he mean?" Neither of them answered. Instead, the first keeper slowly raised one hand. The entire archive changed. The endless shelves disappeared. The black stone floor dissolved. The enormous chamber faded away. Daniel suddenly found himself standing somewhere else. A quiet office, sunlight, wooden desks, fresh paint, construction workers. The year the archive had just been completed. Daniel watched in silence. Young engineers walked through the hallways. Architects examined blueprints. Government officials smiled for photographs. Everything looked completely ordinary. Then, one man carrying a rolled blueprint stopped. He looked directly into the camera, directly at Daniel, almost as though he could see him. The blueprint slipped from his hands. It rolled across the floor. Daniel looked down, across the paper. He read 2 words written in bright red ink: Room RED. The vision changed. Another year. Maintenance workers stood inside elevator 3. One of them unlocked the hidden compartment beneath the control panel. Daniel watched as the red button was revealed for the very first time. One worker reached toward it, another grabbed his arm. The vision ended before the button was touched. Again, everything changed. Michael Turner, young, alive, laughing with 6 other investigators. Daniel recognized every face from the faded photograph. 7 people. They entered elevator 3 together. The doors closed. The elevator rose. The display changed. None of them ever came back. The vision changed again. A younger Alina Brooks, standing alone inside the same elevator, crying, holding a torn sheet of paper, exactly like the page she had ripped from case file #14. The doors opened. Bright crimson light flooded the elevator. She stepped forward. Then everything went black. Reality returned. The endless archive surrounded them once more. Daniel looked at Alina. Tears filled her eyes. "You remembered," he whispered. She slowly nodded. "I never escaped." Silence. "I was allowed to leave." Daniel felt the words strike harder than anything he had heard so far. You mean she looked directly at him? The archive doesn't trap people. A long pause, it recruits them. The first keeper slowly approached. His footsteps echoed softly across the black stone floor. When someone remembers too much, he said, they become dangerous. Daniel refused to step back. So you erase them? No. The keeper shook his head. We preserve them. He looked around the endless shelves. The world calls it disappearance. He smiled faintly. We call it continuity. Without warning, a loud metallic alarm echoed through the archive. Not from the building, from somewhere even deeper. For the first time, the first keeper looked genuinely surprised. The stranger turned toward the darkness. No, he whispered. That isn't possible. Michael slowly stepped backward. Daniel looked from one face to another. What happened? No one answered. Far beyond the endless shelves, somewhere beneath level R, a deep concrete wall cracked once. Then again, dust drifted upward through the air. The entire archive trembled. The first keeper stared into the darkness for the first time in centuries. He looked afraid. Then, a calm automated voice echoed throughout the archive, warning a pause, containment failure, another pause. Sealed section open. Every light inside the archive instantly turned red. The first keeper whispered only 4 words. It found the tunnel. Crimson emergency lights flooded the entire archive. The endless rows of shelves disappeared into a sea of deep red illumination. It looked as though the building itself had begun bleeding light. The automated voice echoed once again. Warning, containment failure. Unknown entity has left the sealed section. Thousands of tiny crimson indicators illuminated simultaneously throughout the archive. For the first time, Daniel saw even the first keeper look genuinely alarmed. That's impossible, the stranger whispered. The first keeper turned sharply toward him. It was never supposed to find the passage. We sealed it. We only delayed it, and Daniel could no longer remain silent. What exactly are you talking about? The first keeper looked directly at him. Not who. A pause. What? Without warning, the floor beneath them trembled violently. A deep impact rolled through the archive as though an enormous slab of reinforced concrete had collapsed somewhere far below. Then another and another. Michael's face turned pale. It's breaking through the barriers. Daniel frowned. What barriers? Michael slowly pointed toward the floor. There is another level beneath the archive. Alina quietly spoke. We called it the sealed section. The first keeper slowly closed his eyes. For 119 years, his voice was barely above a whisper. We kept it down there. Daniel stared at him. What is beneath us? No one answered. Then, another sound echoed through the archive. Not metal, not alarms, not footsteps. A distant whistle, like wind rushing through an impossibly long tunnel. The sound grew louder. Every silent figure beside the archive cabinets slowly turned toward the floor. Daniel felt a faint vibration beneath his feet. Something enormous was moving underground. The first keeper spoke sharply. All keepers to the containment gates. Instantly, dozens of silent figures came to life. The same motionless people who had looked like statues only moments earlier. They hurried through the endless shelves. None of them spoke. None hesitated. Each already knew exactly where to go. Daniel watched them disappear into the darkness. They are alive. Michael answered quietly, as alive as they can still be. The first keeper turned back toward Daniel. You wanted to know why the archive exists? Daniel nodded. The archive was never built as a prison. He paused. It was built as a lock. The words settled heavily over the chamber. Daniel felt a chill run through him. A lock for what? The first keeper slowly lowered his gaze toward the black stone floor. For the tunnel. The automated system spoke again. Section T, perimeter breach, sealed gate open. Daniel immediately turned toward Alina. Section T. Her face went pale. No, that isn't possible. Michael spoke softly. We never said its full name. Daniel looked at him. What name? Michael answered slowly. Tunnel division. Silence returned at last. Daniel understood. The Red Room protocol had never been the real investigation. It had only been the security system. The first keeper sighed deeply. The Red Room was never the most dangerous place. He looked into the darkness. It only concealed the path. Daniel hesitated before asking to where. The keeper answered quietly. To the tunnel that has no exit. Far ahead, beyond the endless shelves, a brilliant white light suddenly appeared as though massive blast doors had opened somewhere deep beneath the archive. Then came another sound, one Daniel immediately recognized. He froze. A train far away, moving slowly. The sound echoed as though railway tracks ran directly beneath the archive. Impossible. They were beneath downtown Washington, deep underground. The sound grew louder. Then came the unmistakable rhythm of steel wheels crossing steel rails, slow, steady, ancient, as though an old train were approaching from somewhere beyond reality itself. Daniel looked toward Alina. You hear it too? She slowly nodded. Tears filled her eyes. It always begins, she whispered, with the train. The first keeper turned toward Daniel. His voice remained calm, but now, for the first time, Daniel heard exhaustion in it. If we cannot seal the tunnel, he paused. The archive will no longer contain what exists beyond it. Daniel swallowed and then. The first keeper stared into the endless darkness, then every place that has ever disappeared. Another pause will begin to return. At that exact moment, every crimson emergency light went dark. The archive was swallowed by complete blackness. Then, somewhere deep beneath them, a locomotive sounded its horn long. Low, powerful, it echoed through the darkness, not like a train moving through a tunnel, but like something awakening inside the memory of the world itself.